It is evening in our home, and everyone's in bed, except for me, and I thought I might take this opportunity to share with you the books that we've been reading about Abraham Lincoln. I'm Julia, and welcome to my channel, Freestyling It. The topic of Abraham Lincoln was actually a request from my son, my oldest son, Judah. We had been looking at the Underground Railroad and a little bit on the Civil War, doing lots of reading in that regard, and that naturally brought up Abraham Lincoln on several different occasions. And so eventually he asked, "Mom, can we get some more books out about Abraham Lincoln? I would love to read more." And so I did. I ordered some books, and the best ones are here sitting next to me, so I will go through them and let you know what we enjoyed reading. Another way that Abraham Lincoln had come to the forefront as well was when my son was looking at his piggy bank. Abraham Lincoln is featured on our American penny. So in my search for Abraham Lincoln books, I came across this book about pennies, and I thought it could tie in quite well with how he had noticed Abraham Lincoln on our penny, which turned into a very interesting study. We actually dumped out his penny bank numerous times to take note of the things that we read about in this book. One of them I'll just make note of is about mints, the mints in the United States. I didn't know this, but on the coin there's actually a letter related to where it was minted. We were only able to find D and P on our coins. We didn't have any that were minted in with S or W. So our coins were minted in Denver, Colorado, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. No San Francisco, California, or West Point, New York coins in our little stash. So here's where the D is. So that stands for Denver, Colorado. So we found that interesting, and we went in depth to look and see where we could find all the instances of letters, not just on pennies, but on other American coins as well. These books about Abraham Lincoln, I organized them in chronological order, at least as much as I could. There is definite overlap. This one I'll show you first, and it's called When I Grow Up, Abraham Lincoln. And it tells the story as if through his own words. So for example, one of the pages says, "I liked New Salem. As the store clerk, I had free time for reading poetry and plays and telling stories to customers. I made friends quickly." Not sure if I had the accent there all right, but that's kind of the flavor of the book. The book that I have concerning Abraham Lincoln's boyhood is called Honey, the Dog Who Saved Abe Lincoln. This is a true story about a dog that Abe befriended and ended up saving him when he was stuck in a precarious situation. This story really captured well Abe's character, his ease in the woods and with animals, his desire to help, and his proclivity to kind of lose track of time in the woods. He would sometimes be late for certain things that were required of him, certain chores and such, but it was because he was caring for things, animals in the woods, or observing things in nature. So a really great story that captures well the boyhood of Abe Lincoln. This one, Abe Lincoln and the Muddy Pig, was another interesting story. The disappointing part about it to me is that I wasn't able to confirm anywhere in the book or on the back if it was a true story about Abraham Lincoln or if it was a story that the author came up with to represent his character and to represent what they knew to be true about his care for animals. He was on his way to giving a speech as a young man, and came across a pig who was stuck in some mud, and eventually hauled the pig out and gave the speech, even though his best suit had evidence of his rescue all over it. Great story and good illustrations. We enjoyed it, even if it wasn't quite a true story. Abe Lincoln's Hat. Now, this is a book that I had when I was a girl. I had this in my library growing up, and I can remember paging through this book and reading this often, and when we read it together now, it surely did not disappoint. It was a joy to read and remember, kind of reminisce and seeing these photos or these illustrations that I looked at when I was a little girl. And this just tells a story about Abe Lincoln's life as a lawyer in a way that's very interesting. It uses his hat to tell a story about his correspondence and important papers and the letters that he kept in his hat to kind of organize his life. That was his way of keeping things organized. And then at the back, I think this is one of my favorite parts about the book too. It has some real photographs of some of the characters that come up in the story. And I can just remember looking at these pictures and just loving to see the faces of the actual men who are in the story. So moving into the period of time when he was elected president, this story, How Kate Warne Saved President Lincoln. It is about the lady detective, actually the first woman detective in the United States, and how she caught wind of a plot against Lincoln's life when he first was elected president. This is a story I had never heard before. I had never heard of Kate Warne, and I had never heard of this plot. We really enjoyed reading about her, reading her story, and kind of marveled at just the amazing sequence of events that transpired, both in Kate Warne becoming a detective and in Abraham Lincoln's life being spared. So during the time when he was president, obviously the Gettysburg Address is a highlight of his presidency. This is Just a Few Words, Mr. Lincoln, the story of the Gettysburg Address. I really enjoyed this book. We read it together today. Jean Fritz wrote this, and I'm familiar with a couple of her other books. She always is able to spin things with a little bit of humor, and it keeps us as the reader engaged to have that bit of humor, even in for some hard content, like obviously Abraham Lincoln was speaking at Gettysburg, which was the site of a very terrible battle in the Civil War. But Fritz really has a knack for balancing the serious with just that slight bit of humor that makes it palatable to the reader, especially to the young reader. So Just a Few Words, Mr. Lincoln. A well done book. This one, the Gettysburg Address, the illustrator Michael McCurdy is actually descended from a man who fought in the Civil War, and that just makes the illustrations that much more meaningful. So basically this book is the words in this book are only the Gettysburg Address, and coupled with the illustrations, it just becomes very, very vivid and meaningful, even without color in black and white. That almost just creates, the somberness needed for the topic, but it keeps the interest. Definitely does well at keeping and holding interest. This book is called What Lincoln Said. Now, this is more on the Emancipation Proclamation. This covers his signing it into being on January 1st, 1863, New Year's Day, which tied in for us as well because, let's see, we're just in the first week of January here ourselves. So that became meaningful to us in a new way, that's when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law. And this is a well-done book as well, covering early events in his life. It's fun because it has a little quotes here and there in the text that are actually actual quotes from Lincoln. Yeah, it gives a great overview of his life and character. The last book that we read together is actually not specifically about Lincoln. It's called Finding Lincoln. And this is a book I found just in browsing books online as far as what to order from the library. I found this book and it seemed to just be really appropriate for what Abraham Lincoln lived for. It's about a boy who lived in Alabama who, because of the color of his skin, could not enter the library. He was assigned to write a report about Abraham Lincoln because his question to his teacher was, did President Lincoln shake things up when he was a boy? And they had no books about when Abe Lincoln was a boy. He wasn't able to source any books about Abe Lincoln's childhood. And so he decided he was going to shake things up a little bit, and he walked into the library. And I just loved this. He was sent out, but one of the librarians told him to come back at 5 when the library was closed, secretively, of course, because she jeopardized her job to even make him that offer of coming back. And so the story continues of him being helped by this librarian. And it's such a wonderful story and such a great picture as to how we as individuals can impact each other, and we can impact society for good, even by little choices that we make. So Finding Lincoln, I would recommend it just as an overall really good book, especially about race and about race tensions in the past. And then it really included Lincoln because he did a report on Lincoln and learned about Lincoln, and it had a page actually about some of the things that he learned about Lincoln. The little boy eventually was able to read about Lincoln as a young man, as a child and as a young man, and that tied in very nicely too with our study on Abe Lincoln. So those are all the books that I read together with my children. It was a really good overview of Lincoln's life and legacy. And it's interesting, whenever we dive into a topic together, it not only is interesting to the children, but I know that I learn and grow from it. My interest is piqued. And one of the books that I had gotten out from the library about Abraham Lincoln that had popped up as well as a good book, but I didn't think quite that my children would be ready for it yet. But it's called The Wound is Mortal, and it's the story of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. None of the kids' books that we went through really touched on the assassination so much. Only one of them that we read even mentioned it towards the end. But one of the things that my son had been asking about initially was, how he died. And we had talked a little bit about how he had been assassinated and what had happened in that regard. And interestingly enough, one of my ancestors was actually sitting in the theater box with Lincoln. General Rathbone was his name. And so it almost feels like it's a little bit personal. I mean, I don't want to take that too far, but there's almost something there that feels close. And so this reading, I read through this whole book. It's a pretty short read, you know, with fairly big print. It jumps from different perspectives, like it John Wilkes Booth, and let's see who else. Charles Leal, the doctor who ends up treating Lincoln. It talks from Abraham Lincoln's point of view. So this was really interesting. The wound is mortal and sobering. That brings me to the end on my stack of Lincoln. Please check back. If you enjoyed this video and found it to be helpful, please check back again to my channel. I'm trying to post a video every week, and obviously I'm a homeschooling mom, so life is busy and it doesn't always go as planned, but that is my intention and goal. And I feel like I have a ton more ideas and things we're working on now that I am hoping to capture and share with you all to be of encouragement and to provide inspiration for your own homeschool journeys and how to approach it with your kids, learning alongside them, learning with them, learning for your own benefit even alongside them. So hope you'll check back again. Bye for now.